My name is MaiNeng. I go by she, her, new pronouns. I am a PhD student in the Educational Policy Studies program working under Dr. Stacy Lee. I've been with the Ntaub research team since January 2019, so I'm going into my third year as part of the team. I'll actually take this time and let Matt and Bailey also introduce themselves, and then we can continue with the presentation.
Thanks, MaiNeng. My name is Matt Wolfgram. I'm a researcher at WCR and one of the mentors or sort of research mentors for this Ntaub research project. Pleasure to be here.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bailey Smolarek. I'm also a researcher at WCER and one of the mentors for this project.
All right. So I would like to start off by saying that, so we'll be talking a little bit about autoethnographic journaling as a research tool, but also as research data. But for us as research mentors, when we started having students do autoethnographic journaling, it was actually kind of a learning process for us as well. We didn't realize that it would be such a powerful space, that it could provide such rich insights and such a rich source of data. But because we have found it to be so impactful in informing every aspect of our research process, we wanted to publish about it. So part of this presentation is a little bit of a pilot for a piece that we would like to publish. And the other part is to get your thoughts and feedback regarding this work. So that said, our main goal for today is to present about our use of ethnographic journaling in our PAR project, and to make a case for autoethnography's contribution to socially just research methodologies, moving towards, I guess, this concept of decolonizing research methodologies. So before I start talking about autoethnography, I would like to provide some brief background information about our team, starting with our team's deliberate spelling of Hmong. So you are probably familiar with Hmong being spelled as HMONG, as that first term there is spelled. And for our team, the students, after much reflection on their identities and conversations with one another, the student researchers agreed to spell Hmong as we do here with the capital H and capital M, because they felt that the capital H and M aim to be more inclusive of the various Hmong dialects. So in Hmong, there are two main dialects. One is Hmong White, which pronounces Hmong with an aspirated H, and then the Hmongleng or Hmong Green dialect, which pronounces Hmong with no aspirated H, or sorry, with no aspiration. And so students felt that this change was necessary to recognize kind of the multiplicity of Hmong communities and Hmong identities, and also as a way to challenge the dominance of Hmong white presence in written US texts. And then we borrowed the OOB part of the spelling from the Hmong Romanized popular or phonetic alphabet as a rejection of the Anglicization of how we are known. And students felt that this spelling was more representative of our mother tongue, and also allows for them as Hmong people to reclaim and embrace their Hmong identity, history, and heritage. And then our project, and also now our research team, is our HMoob American College Ntaub, and that there's actually great significance for why the term Ntaub is in in use here. So for those who may not be familiar with Hmong culture or language, Ntaub, I mean, it literally translates to flower cloth, but it is an umbrella term used to describe Hmong fiber arts. traditionally, these arts or embroidery, textile were used to decorate clothing, but also to communicate messages. And then in the or when the Hmong fled from Laos due to persecution in the 1970s and were relocated into Thai refugee camps, a new form of bandao, which is how we commonly think about bandao when we hear it now, is the story cloth, right? And in the story cloth, this it's where a lot of Hmong refugees that were sewing these story cloths were depicting their experiences of trauma and displacement and also resilience through these story cloths. And so with our project, rather than a physical story cloth, our study is sort of a symbolic weaving together of Hmong American students' counter narratives that also pays homage to the Hmong legacy. So a little bit about how our team got started. Our project emerged from a partnership between Matt and Bailey researchers at the Center for Research on College Workforce Transitions, or CCWT, and the Hmong American Studies Committee, which I will from here on out call HMASC. And so HMASC is a student-led activist initiative that started in 2015, and they were advocating, or they still are, advocating for Hmong American studies here at UW-Madison. So after facing considerable struggles in trying to have their experiences recognized by administrators and also in pushing for these different policy changes for more equitable experiences and opportunities on campus, HMASC student activists, were kind of just met with a little bit of a waiting out of them to graduate. And so through a mutual acquaintance, they were actually introduced to Matt and Bailey in the spring of 2018, about almost 4 years after they had started, or after the group had started. And so after much discussion, this led to the start of our community-based participatory action research project, which began in the fall of 2018. So I'm not going to dwell too much on these next couple slides because the purpose of this presentation isn't really to talk about so much of our actual findings through the interviews that we had with participants, but we conducted, it was a 2-year 2-year for last year, where we were collecting data through semi-structured interviews and also doing observations and participant observations. We were also collecting artifacts to analyze artifacts such as like handouts or photos, newspaper clippings, all of that. And then also on top of that, we were having student researchers keep an autoethnographic journal. And sorry, I'm like transitioning between my slides and my my notes, and so it's kind of a weird thing to transition between. So with college student engaged participatory action research, I'm sure maybe some of you here are familiar with PAR, but what I think is really neat about our project is that while CB-PAR has been an approach that has been used in various settings, such as like in youth organizations or in K-12 schooling, in healthcare settings, and even in prisons, we, from our literature search, have found that it has not been used very often in university settings. And so what we're hoping we can offer and also argue for is that CB-PAR offers a really exciting and much needed approach to studying issues in higher ed, because it not only includes the perspectives and experiences of college students, those who are often excluded from these policy debates, but it also positions students in a researcher role to guide every aspect of the research, right? So from the research questions to the research approaches, to data collection, to the analysis, to dissemination. And this approach also allows for a theory production that is really like conceptually innovative and also action oriented, which can inform activism, pedagogy, policy debates, and policy implementation, which our team has been trying to dabble in all of these different things. I mean, it's a lot for one team to kind of handle, but I think we are trying to figure out different ways to be able to make an impact in each of these different areas. And then another thing that I guess I wanted to bring up too is something that we were often questioned about is this concept of like community-based, right? Because we talk about this as a community-based participatory action research project. Often in academia, the concept of community-based is it situates the community as something outside of the university. Or even in a way where, I mean, there's always a power imbalance there, right? Where community-based work is seen as, you know, the university extending a hand to help a community outside of the university, a community that's often, you know, minoritized in some way, right? And so the reason why we are taking a CBPAR approach to our work with Hmong American college students is because within the university, there are various university communities. And that's something that we want to get recognized, and that not every community on this campus have the same access to the same opportunities, the same experiences, the same way of experiencing what we think of as like the Wisconsin experience here at UW-Madison. And so this is why we do consider Hmong American students a community that we are working with. So now I want to provide this quote from a reflection that one of our student researchers had on CBPAR. And I think, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I think one thing that I do want to pull out is the reflection of how by using this approach, right, their lived experiences are reflected in every single aspect of this work. And in that way, they felt that like they were able to tell the stories that they felt needed to be told, and also do it in a way that honors the community's stories and lives and experiences and voices. And so I think one of my favorite parts about this this reflection piece is that they talk about how our lived experiences of our pain is not used as a tool to shame us, but rather to confront colonized narratives and recommendations. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in a little bit actually now. So one of the reasons why we use autoethnography is because I think as both a research approach and a pedagogical tool, CBPAR empowers students to become critical inquirers of their lived experiences. It enables students to become producers of knowledge rather than just consumers of knowledge, which is often how we think about students in what Paulo Freire calls a banking model of education, right? But I think also in this way, we're trying to uplift this concept of conscientisakao, sorry, I can't pronounce that correctly. Paulo Freire's concept of consciousness raising, right? And in our work, we refer to this concept as building critical consciousness. So by participating in CBPARs, we try to get our student researchers to interrogate issues of power and privilege in order to better understand how systems of power and oppression work, but also to understand how their personal experiences and their lived experiences are all connected to these larger systems that are at play. And so in the Freirean tradition, we also contend that transformational growth from participating in CBPAR can only be achieved if actions are coupled with critical self-reflection. So to aid in the reflective component of CBPAR, that's why we have our student researchers keep these autoethnographic journals. For the most part, it's more or less of a free reflective kind of piece, but there are times when we do provide them with prompts to respond to. But often we are just asking them to write about their experiences throughout the research process, or really like even anything they observe or anything that we discuss during our team meetings as a way to process and reflect on what they have been learning and the things that they're thinking about. So in this way too, it's also, I guess, it's a way to, it's another form of knowledge, right, that we are hoping to get recognized, where it's actually, I'll move on. So I think one of the things about CBPAR is that CBPAR doesn't automatically mean that the issues that we have with these kind of colonizing powers within the academy doesn't exist, right? So within PAR, if it's not done correctly, there are still going to be issues of representation and who has power over what is how the research is done, how it's analyzed, how it's disseminated, all of that, but also like who gets to consume, right? And so because of that, something that we often think about and that we have student researchers often reflect on is, what does it mean to produce knowledge? Who gets to produce knowledge? So essentially, who is known and who gets to be known, right? Or sorry, who gets to be known and who gets to know? And then for what purpose is knowledge produced, right? So we ask these questions about research as a way to think about, because many of the student researchers, actually all of the student researchers, we come from histories where our communities have been extracted from, right? Like we have had these colonizing experiences of research or with research, where we are often the ones to get researched and then someone else gets to tell our stories. And so by using autoethnographic data, we are, I'll go back to that quote a little bit, but by using autoethnographic data or using autoethnography as a tool and as a data in our PAR approach to inform every aspect of our project, it's really kind of our, what I guess Tuck and Yang called the refusal of research, right? To the refusal to use these strategies of social science to social science research methodologies to like further harm our communities. And I want to go back to this quote here from one of our student researchers about their experience with research and how they kind of came into this project because of their past experiences with research as a colonizing kind of method. One thing I want to pull out from this quote, again, because it is a little bit longer, I'll give you a chance to read it, but I do want to point out a couple things, is the question that this student poses about, can I truly decolonize and unlearn at the same time of perpetuating and contributing to the system, right? So here they're questioning if we're doing research, we're participating in the system. Is it possible to decolonize these the ways, or because research is such a colonizing practice, is it possible to decolonize these methods, right? And so one of the things that I think, at least that we've had conversations with students about, is how research as a colonial process, it often only has traditionally allowed minoritized folks into the space to speak about their pains, right, and to relive their traumas, but then not get to actually tell their own stories, because someone else is then representing their stories through, you know, another filter, another lens, and in this way, it is another level of almost like traumatizing folks from minoritized communities, right? And so when, and I think because because research, we're doing research within a settler colonialist nation state, perhaps it's not possible to, I guess, decolonize research, but maybe one way to think about it is like, what are ways that we can challenge current ways of knowing and move towards socially just research processes and methodologies. And for us, we feel that autoethnography challenges the idea that research has to be for others, right? That research has to be done so that we can know more about another group of people. And autoethnography really does this by bringing it back to the personal, right? Because the personal is political. I think through all of our discussions and the reflections that students have had throughout the last almost 3 years that I have been with the project, I think we're at a place where I think a lot of the ways that students understand research is that our research is not for someone else to consume. It is for us to understand better our own experiences, and also in a sense, it's healing for us, right? So we do this work not so we can expose our pains. We already know these pains, right? But that we're doing this work so that we can actually start to heal. This is one part of that process. And I think by participating in autoethnography, it really allows a space for students to be able to do this. Because autoethnography provides, or it highlights other ways of knowing, I guess we're probably not trying to make a claim that we need to legitimize autoethnography, because I think there are knowledge that does not need to be legitimized by the institution, by the academy, in order for it to be legitimate, right? For it to be real, for it to be valuable. What we are trying to argue, though, is that the knowledge that is produced from these autoethnographic reflections pushes back on the idea that knowledge can only be created through facts, or these kind of positivist ways of collecting data, and that it needs to be bias-free, right? Because even in anthropology, I remember, I mean, I came into the university like 7 or so years ago. And even when I was starting to take some of my methods courses on anthropology, I think one of the things that we learned even just 7 years ago was the threat of going native, right? Like, you should not go native, because if you become too in, then your judgment is going to be clouded, your research is not going to be valid, kind of a sense, right? And so so I think autoethnography pushes against that narrative, and actually brings in the personal lived experiences, feelings, and thoughts of people doing the research, and really like gets them to actually critically think about and reflect on these things, and how these different things that we bring, these different lenses that we bring to our research impact the research itself, right? And how the analyses and the ways that we do distribute the information afterwards. And so again, it really aligns with our intentions of doing CBPAR work in a socially just way, and to really center community voices and community stories, and to really highlight that, like, especially for our research process, it's got multiple different voices, and not just the voices of our various participants, right, but from our researchers as well. Also, I think with autoethnographic journaling, it also allowed for our team to have important, insightful discussions that come out of you know, reading one another's autoethnography or autoethnographic, I can't talk, sorry, autoethnographic journal, and really, like, I think some of the most informative conversations that we've had as a team actually came out of some of these journal entries that people noticed or observed that, hey, like I also like felt this way or observed this, that maybe like we don't think to bring up in person, or that is hard to say in person, but that when we write them down, and we feel that we can trust our team members for us to be able to share that with them in some form, right? It really builds trust among the team, but also provides a space for our team to then validate one another's experience, but also to really like think about how those things are impacting us as we do research. So okay, I think something, as I'm trying to close out here, that we are thinking about is why we would, or why autoethnography is a different way to conceptualize the research process, but also it adds another layer of very important, I think, insight about research and about CBPAR in particular. Because you see the growth, you actually see the growth from the reading students' ethnographic or autoethnographic journals, of how they're understanding and situating themselves within the research. You know, at the very beginning, to kind of how as their critical consciousness is, as they're developing their critical consciousness, they are also developing as researchers, as people, as folks who are thinking about how they can continue to advocate for the various minoritized communities that they belong. And I think because even with participatory methods, it's still this idea of there still needs to be a partnership, right, of institutional actors or researchers, or there needs to be a PI that is from the university, right, in order to do this work. I think that's something we contend with, is while we are doing this work in a sense to move towards socially just methodologies, we're still confronted with the fact that the system and the structures have not changed enough, right, for us to be able to do this work and say that it's completely decolonizing because these structures still exist. I think, like, for example, with our team, we've come across a ton of a lot of pushback on the way that we choose to spell Hmong because it's not standardized, or even in publishing an op-ed, we were told not to put everybody's name on there as authorship. So just some of those processes that I think that has not been changed yet, that doesn't allow for much freedom in this research method, right? And I think, and that's why I think the way that I think about research is that it is always going to be almost this colonial practice, because there are always going to be limits, there are always going to be restrictions, and we don't get to control those restrictions. But I think what we are trying to do with autoethnography is to say that it's not, for us, it's not necessarily that we need to have, that autoethnography needs to be seen as a legitimate form of knowledge creation, or as a legitimate form of data. But that I think autoethnography is valuable to the process, and it's valuable to the people participating in it. And maybe that's enough. And maybe there are stories that don't need to be told through, and even through autoethnography. I think when I was trying to go through and trying to find pieces of or journal entries to include in this presentation, I actually ended up taking out a lot of the original entries that I wanted to put in, because I think, one, I mean, there's not enough time to talk about them, but also two, that as I was putting this together, I was thinking about how perhaps there are things that is just, it's okay for our team to have that understanding, and maybe that in itself is healing enough, and that in itself is powerful enough, and that it doesn't have to be that we are doing research for other people, and that other people need to know all of it, right? So again, just to recap a little bit, with college student engaged PAR, we really feel that these approaches, or the PAR approaches, need to be or should be used as ways to address problems in higher ed policy. PAR can, and any data from PAR can also be used to advocate for different things in higher ed, and is also a largely untapped kind of area in higher ed research that could definitely be built upon. And then the importance of using autoethnographic data to inform every aspect of research, or of the research process, is so crucial to creating research and research methodologies that are critical and much more socially just, especially within communities that have always had these kind of colonizing experiences with research. So with that, one question we would like to pose, again, as I shared at the beginning, we are thinking about writing a piece about autoethnography. And so we would love to hear your feedback, any advice or issues related to this approach that you think would need more thought or developments. Again, this is fairly new as we are theorizing this for us. And so, yeah, any feedback that you all have would be really great. Matt and Bailey, I don't know if there's anything else you all want to add.
No, thank you, MaiNeng. But we, just to echo what you said, we would really love feedback from you all and questions.
I'm sorry, did I have I'm late for a meeting, but I am very much moved by what you've shared, MaiNeng. And I'd like to talk more with y'all about this because for the work that I've done over the years, this is an issue that should be tied to validity. Validity, the soundness and the trustworthiness of the knowing that is gained from the data collection methods that are used, and what's missing from the picture that tells the story about the folks in whose name the work is being done when we don't have data like this. Okay, my training over the years here in Madison 11 years ago was quantitative because there wasn't any qualitative. However, quantitative data usually is broad in its scope of population coverage, but shallow in its depth. Qualitative often has great depth, but is narrow in its scope of population coverage. Bottom line, you don't want whatever it is you're seeking to have insight into by doing the research to either be covered by provided through a skeleton nor a formless blob of flesh. You need both and. And to the extent that I'm understanding what you've shared around autoethnography, that helps to provide the flesh on the bones. So it's not either or, it's both and. Now, in the evaluation profession, which is where most of my work is done, we fought that out years ago, where quantitative was privileged and qualitative was like the stepchild. There's a recognition that the research or evaluation question drives the method, not in advance saying one is the gold standard or preferred because it gives more insight, because there are blind spots to both. And so we need both and. So I would really love to talk to you more about that and tying it to validity. And so you're not asking permission for this data to be brought in the mix. It's essential in order to attend to threats to validity.
Yes,
Thank you for
absolutely.
doing it. And
Thank you.
keep it moving. I gotta run, y'all.
Okay, thank you so
Yeah.
much. Thanks
Yes.
for staying for this too.
Okay, take good care. Bye-bye.
Yes. Yes, I think that's a really good point that Hazel brought up about not asking for permission, and I think that is I think that's a much more clear way of what I was trying to say earlier, which is that we're not asking that autoethnography is legitimized through the academy, right? But we're not asking for that permission. We're saying that this is so crucial and so important to the research process, and especially when you do participatory action research.
I have a question for you. I would like to hear more about the things that the students would share with each other and what came out of that, or you said it was very productive for them. And did you put any kind of guidelines on that, or did you direct it in any way, or was it free form? It just sounds very interesting.
Yeah, so there, like I said, there were, we gave some prompts for some of the entries that we asked them to write. Like for example, one of the prompts we asked them to think about is what does being Hmong mean to you? How have you come to terms with your Hmongness? Or have you, right? And so that's one. Another one that we have asked that we provided a prompt for is for them to think about their positionality and specifically as it relates to the participants that we are working with, right? So they are people who are situated within the community that they are doing research in. And so how are they thinking about their positionality within the research, within the community, how that affects the research process. So those are the types of prompts that we have provided. But other entries that students have written are after they do their interviews or their observations, they'll journal about that experience, or journal about maybe a realization they had. Another thing that was common that students did write about, oh, we also, this one was really insightful. We asked students about their ESL experience, or their experience with ESL in the K-12 schooling system. And I think that was really great because it was generative for our conversations. It like led directly to one of the, or several of the research or the interview protocol questions that we had. So it, and also students were commenting on one another's entry and just like sharing or feeling heard, feeling like their experiences are validated, that they weren't the only one to have had those microaggressive kind of experiences. And so, yeah, so those are some of the things that they would write about. Bailey and Matt, there's more that you want to share.
Yeah, I think you sum that up really well with how like the prompts worked and everything. Just to give a little logistical background, so we used just Box, UW Box, for all of our protocols, our data analysis, all that kind of research info. And so we also had the autoethnographic journals housed on that. So everybody had their own folder, their own kind of document that was theirs to use as a space to write this out. And so as MaiNeng said, we would sometimes give prompts, and those prompts were generated typically through our weekly research meetings. And so the conversations that we had, we would kind of be like, oh, let's talk about this more, let's think about this more. And that became a prompt similar to what MaiNeng just described. And then we also encourage student researchers to just use that space to think through things that they were seeing or thinking about or hearing through their interviews, as well as kind of an analytic memo. So once you finished an interview with someone, you would do kind of the things you need to do in research and copy and paste this and that, put things away. And then you go into your autoethnographic journal and just kind of think about it, reflect on it. And you know, how does those experiences you learned about make you think about your own, make you think about this other person that you interviewed, make you think about this other, you know, all these other dynamics. So kind of just creating that space for reflecting and thinking and processing, and then sharing it with the rest of the team.
It just, there's two things I wanted to add on. Like this is just reflecting on what Bailey just mentioned. I think that another thing we did is we would read, you know, articles in education, research, and theory. For example, like critical race theory, Asian critical theory, and so on. And the autoethnographic journals were a place that students would think about the reading and our discussions of the readings, and kind of contextualize that in terms of their own experiences in a narrative form, their own experiences as Hmong American college students who themselves experience UW as a predominantly white institution, as well as the people that they interacted, observed, and interviewed, who are their peers. So I think that's when, you know, when Bailey, or I mean, sorry, when MaiNeng was talking about the critique of sort of using participatory methods as a cover for just academics kind of telling other people's stories. Here we're using autoethnography as a way for the students to theorize. And that theorizing makes its way into our plan for action, for changing things, as well as into, you know, publications that might impact research. So it's like sort of the theorizing aspect of it. The other thing I'd like to tell, the other story I'd like to tell briefly is the way in which we use autoethnography to inform the development of the research protocol. So the questions that students asked their peers, that was really fascinating. You know, so we started with basically asking the students to think about our general goal of the research, and then, you know, write about how it might relate to their own experiences. You know, we did that thing where we iterated on it. You know, everyone looked and commented on each other's, and then we met and we started to think like, so if we were to investigate this, what are some questions that we would want to develop? And then students went back to their journals, and through a couple week process, we developed an interview, sort of semi-structured interview protocol to guide a very culturally grounded inquiry. And I feel like that protocol is a result of the autoethnographic engagement. And honestly, it's the best protocol, a research protocol I've ever been involved in, because it had the benefit of that sort of constant engagement and reflection based on the student's experience.
I'm just going to say, so we have a couple student researchers in the audience, so no pressure, but if any of you want to jump in for anything, you're very welcome and invited to.
Yes, and if I may add too, I think another really powerful piece of the autoethnographic journal is, it also provided a space for students to share what their hopes and their dreams and their visions for the future are too, right? So like their experiences with ethnic studies courses or their experiences in Hmong studies related courses, and how that informs what they want to see for future Hmong studies program here at UW-Madison, right, or elsewhere. And there were plenty of that too, where students were writing about, to quote one of them, like, I dream of spaces with love and care, right? I dream of a space where we can learn skills from one another without school or college. We become our own healers and supporters, our own experts. So it wasn't just a space where they were doing, reflection on trauma and kind of their frustrations. It was also a place for them to kind of explore their imaginations or their dreams for a better world, right? Which is why they're engaged in this work. It's because they want to create a better world. So I found that to be really powerful as I was reading through the autoethnographic journals too.
And just a follow-up question, did the students then use their research in any way, like other than just a personal reflection, or was it presented in any ways, or how was that?
Okay, I'll start. I'm sure I'll forget things, but we've done a lot of stuff with it. We've done a few kind of university or public presentations of our work. We've done a few reports, which you can find on the CCWT website, which you can get to through the WCER website. I'm happy to share that with Haley and have spread it to you all, or you can contact one of us directly. We just got an academic publication accepted. We've done presentations with funders, which are also up on the website that you can see. The students have done a lot of outreach through HMASC with other students on campus. We've done some outreach with other Hmong scholars and Hmong student kind of groups in the state of Wisconsin. So we've been trying to think of, like, really at the end of the day, it's like, what do we want to, what's good, what isn't good, what do we want to change, what can we help with, what, thinking about the next group of students here, how can we make things better, and how can we at least get things heard, so yeah, if you guys want to jump in.
Yeah, I think another thing that was really neat about that the team did was to pull the data, the disaggregated data on Hmong American students at UW schools. And it was, this data has been, they've been collecting it for, I think, 6 to 8 years at different UW schools, but it has never before been made public. And so our team actually took that data and basically interpreted it and put it into a report to kind of lay out kind of the, the state of Hmong American students, I guess, in the UW system. And I think that was really eye-opening for a lot of people because that was the first time they were seeing it disaggregated from like Asian American student data. And when you see it like that, it's definitely not the common, what we think of as the model minority success story, when we see all the data kind of just aggregated together. And another thing too that the students did was they actually got advice from all of their participants, advice for future students or students who are wanting to go on to higher ed after high school. And they created a handbook of just advice for students that then was distributed to new students, but also sent to some high school students as well.
I don't mean to be dominating all of this, but I'm really impressed that that your approach was not about just deficit, like viewing their experience as a deficit, and that it was empowering and consciousness raising. I think that's a really powerful element. And I wonder if you had anything else to say about that.
So our students, particular aspect of this project relating to the impact of this research, but and through the autoethnography, so the impact of kind of critical Hmong studies coursework at UW-Madison. And that's available on our website. They argue with their data for, in particular, like the consciousness raising consequences of critical pedagogies. It's a very powerful, it's the first a research project that I know of that has used kind of a participatory action approach to evaluate the impacts of a critical pedagogy approach, particularly ethnic studies. And so it's a sort of an innovative way to look at it. Aspect that they focused on was sort of the sort of of community cultural wealth. So some of the typical concepts in critical race theory, and so that's something that the students have really focused in on as a consequential aspect of this project. Haley,
Well,
I think, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm just interested in this because I'm also working with a marginalized community of people who are have gone through the criminal justice system. And so oftentimes that is also a thing where people are looked at as like a deficit in a deficit way. And so just kind of the creating representations of yourself that are empowering and consciousness raising, I think, is a beautiful thing to do and very helpful for people. Thank you so much for presenting about your research. It's very inspiring.
We're just about at 10 o'clock. So this is
Yeah.
where we would all thank you and applaud you, just different in a virtual space. Thank you so much. This is really important work, and I'm so grateful to learn more about it and to be able to share this with a broader community.
Thank you, Haley.
Yeah, thank you.